Erick's going to come and walk us back in history. Please welcome Erick Nason for Ranger.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Ranger Captain Jacob Clark. I am from Major Robert Ryder's Independent Battalion of Rangers. It has done my heart well to see how much you've talked about my good friend Francis Marion. But a lot of folks have asked me, well, you were with Marion back in the beginning. What was it like? I don't know, I didn't grow up with him. I'm originally from a place called, well, it's Colony, Massachusetts. I guess you call it Maine. As a young lad, I joined Rogers Rangers. 1754, a place called Fort Lyman. You probably know it as Fort Edward. I fought for 5 years against the French and their Indian allies. And we won. We all thought we were going home until 1761. When your Governor Bull sends a request up to General Amherst in New York saying that they needed help down here in South Carolina against the Cherokee. So Rogers sent a company of Rangers, Stockbridge Mohicans, and I went with them. I brought my first sergeant with me, Sergeant Samuel Penny. We arrived in your Charlestown, and we talked to your governor, and we talked to this newly assigned commander, this Colonel Grant, and asked him, what do you expect of us Rangers? Seeing that we are from the great frontier, and we're now down here in South Carolina. He told me about the previous year's expedition when Montgomery's men in 1760 went against the Cherokee, and how poorly the provincial soldiers were, and how hurt my heart, how poorly his Rangers did. So our task was to advise and to prepare the provincials and the Rangers to go against the Cherokee in the next upcoming campaign. So I thought, well, I must be going to be assigned to the Rangers. I was assigned to Middleton's regiment to advise them. It is there with Middleton's regiment that I would meet a company under the command of Captain William Moultrie and a first lieutenant named Francis Marion. A good way to get a feel of what a true man is like is to see him in action. To talk to somebody over a fire at night, to get to know him, because that's what soldiers do. That's how we learn to trust one another, as we get to know about each other's pasts. So when I met this Middleton's regiment, and I do kind of say that with disdain, because I didn't really see Middleton's very much. To be perfectly honest, they should have called it Lawrence Regiment, because he was the one actually running it, this Henry Lawrence. He was only the executive officer, but he was there all the time taking care of his men, where this Middleton was always off doing business. And he would leave. So I was with this regiment. He slid up before me. And I admit I made the mistake of judging a book by its cover when I first laid my eyes on this company and this Lieutenant Francis Marion. Ladies, what you've been hearing about him is true. He is not what you call an attractive man. And it's hard because I am coming from the frontier. Men like Robert Rogers and John Stark, all these rough and ready Rangers who fought up north against the French and their Indians. And I come and I see Marion. He doesn't look like much of a fighter to me. But that was my mistake. Until I got to know him. Until I got to watch him in action. We started to talk. And as a captain, captains train their lieutenants. My sergeant was training the other sergeants in the company because Moultrie's company were going to be the light infantry. They are going to be the scouts, the eyes and ears for the advancing army as we go into Cherokee's land. So we must prepare them, and we are going to pass our knowledge and our experience. But I found out when I started talking to these men, they're not amateurs. These men have served, Marion especially. We sat down numerous times over the fire. He was inquisitive. He was driven, dedicated. He wanted to know more. He asked us about my experience in fighting, but he also wanted to know more about me. We started to compare our lives, how we grew up. I'm definitely no land gentry. I grew up on the frontier. As a young lad, I learned to hunt till my family was wiped out in an Indian raid, where my father was killed, my younger brother was taken somewhere up north into Canada, and then my mother would die of a broken heart. What's a 14-year-old to do? So I basically moved in with my adopted family of the Mohawks and the Mohicans. They call me Okua, the wolf, because of what I've learned about hunting. So when Rogers asked for rangers, they're looking for young, able-bodied men. That's how I grew up. Marion told me about his youth, being the youngest son. He wasn't too hip about becoming a planter, as he told me. He wanted other things. He asked me about school, because he wasn't a fan of going to school, what I learned. I explained how I had to, mostly I learned my schooling was from my family, or from the Great Sachems in the tribe, in the Mohawk, and the Wolf clans, or in the Mohicans, and their knowledge, and they passed on to me. But this reading and writing, I wasn't much of a big fan of that either. And he agreed. He goes, I'm not a big fan. I'm not very good at this, reading and writing. But he told me in his youth that he would try being a sailor. That he would get on a cargo ship out of the Georgetown harbor and he'd see if he could make his life as a seafarer. Well, his first voyage, he told me, didn't end out like he expected, seeing that his ship sank. Him and 5 other sailors were the only survivors, plus, he said, the dog. And that dog didn't survive much because eventually he needed something to eat. Too bad for the dog. He also told me he had a great appreciation of being a landsman at that point. And when he did make it back to Georgetown, he decided to become a planter at that point. Now he also told me his brothers and sisters, as you've already heard about, have already married into very rich families. So he had to take care of his own. But at that time, as a good young man of South Carolina, he had started and joined the St. John's Militia. He started to learn the rudimentary fundamentals of being a soldier. So when the first war broke out with the Anglo-Cherokees, back in 1756, he said, well, compared to your rangers up north, we didn't see as much action. But we did perform as units. We did learn how to be a company. We did learn how to follow orders. Then the next time he was called out, he was a captain in a troop of cavalry. But they were under the control of the British. He was taught by the British Army. He learned their tactics. He also learned their discipline. He saw how rigid their discipline was and what would happen if you did not follow the discipline of the British Army. The flogging, riding the horse, all these other wonderful things to increase your morale, so it always is maintained until the beatings continued, as he would sometimes say. And then another time, getting ready for Littleton's great expedition with Montgomery, he served again. So now, this was his 4th time in the field as a first lieutenant in this light infantry company. So we talked a lot about tactics. He asked us, well, how do you fight against an enemy who doesn't stay still? He wanted to specifically learn these things that we took for granted as Roger's rules of ranging. What are these rules? What are these things about being light infantry? What are these things that we need to learn? So we showed them how to operate as a 2-man section, how to move and work together as a team while one fires and the other one covers, how to move quickly, how to move silently, how to change your outfit, how to wear your equipment, how even to change your hats. So we all noticed they changed because beforehand, South Carolina soldiers were wearing bicorns like the regular British soldiers did. On this campaign, they were issued jockey caps, similar to ours, except it was made from leather, with a silver crescent placed in the middle, so they stand out just a little bit from these nice British red coats that were out there. He also watched what was going on around him, because it was not just the regular British soldiers, the 1st Regiment, the 22nd Regiment, the Highlanders, all these professional soldiers which had come down to South Carolina to help against the Cherokee, but they also called out the 1 Provincial Regiment, Middletons. They called out the militia, and this other group of fine gentlemen who thought they were going to go play soldier in the field for a little bit. They weren't that very good. And all this nice silk clothing they were wearing, we didn't think they would survive very long once we got up into the mountains and start moving up into the high country to get to the Cherokee. We also saw friction. The same problems we saw up in New York between the provincials and the British regulars, especially amongst the officers. How the British officers used to look down on the provincial officers. What was bad for this campaign that Marion was watching along with all the other officers was the fight between Middleton and Grant. Both are colonels. Each one thought they were in command. Grant stated, I have the royal warrant. I am here on behalf of General Amherst. I am here in support of the royal governor. And then Colonel Middleton goes, well, I'm a colonel, outranks you. I'm in command of the Middleton's regiment, and therefore I am in command of the whole army. It doesn't set a good precedence when 2 of the senior leaders are arguing amongst each other while you're trying to plan the action. Marion, Moultrie, all these other officers are watching this. How can you trust your senior leaders if they can't even get along in camp? And then the numerous fights we would have between the regular soldiers and the militiamen. Always something was going on. And of course the strict discipline and they'll come down upon them. And then the deserters. And what would happen to the deserters once they're found and brought back to camp? Marion is watching all of this. He's seeing what is going on. He is learning of how to be a good officer and what not to be. How to be a leader that doesn't force the men to follow. And I can see that over time that his company, his light infantrymen followed him because they wanted to, not because they had to. And the fact that Captain Moultrie didn't have to say, you have to follow the lieutenant. They did it anyways. So as the campaign is getting ready to go, we're sent up to a place called 96 to build a supply base to support the army as we head up north. Along that entire route, instead of just marching, he practiced. He practiced the tactics of movement. He practiced how to scream, how to move in front of the column, how to move to to the flanks of the column how to watch the rear, because that is how the Cherokee attacked. He watched, he practiced, he made sure that his men were always proficient. He also did inspections. He made sure their equipment was immaculate. Attention to detail. So he may have only been this tall physically, but to his men, he was a grenadier. He led from the front. He led by example, because if he was inspecting his men, he was immaculate. His uniform was correct. It was proper. There wasn't a single rust on anything that he had that was metal. He was the example for his men to follow. So when the expedition began and we marched up into the high country, it was his company leading the way. Grant and Middleton are still arguing the whole way up. Every time the army would stop, they would start arguing again on who's in command and who's not in command. We just went into camp. We did what all good soldiers do. We sit around the fire. We pull out our pipes. We talk about home. He was very interested about what it was like up in the north. He asked us about what is snow. Was it as really cold as we heard? And we told him about our great expeditions against the French Fort Carillon. I believe you call it Ticonderoga now. And the fact that we had to use ice skates to get up and down the lakes because the lakes were frozen. Talking to all these good men from South Carolina just amazed them, because they might in their life have seen a little bit of snow. Not the feet of snow that we were used to. But the men got to know each other, and they bonded, they trusted each other. There wasn't the same us and them between the regular British Army, where the officers were always off by themselves. The enlisted were alone. There was some, but it was at an understood level. Marion always had to be careful of how much he fraternized with his men. But he still was sociable. He wasn't much of a talker. It's just because, and he explains this because of his schooling. He wasn't much into reading. He wasn't, that's probably why he was still single. It wasn't because he wasn't really that rich. You know, he did have some land. And we already said he's not much of a looker. And he's just not much of a conversationalist. So maybe that's why he was single. But he did stay focused. So when we crossed into the Cherokee land, he told me that we are on the same trail they were using the year before. And it baffled me, because that's a complete violation of Rangers' rule, or Rogers' rule of ranging. Never use the same trail twice, because that's how the enemy ambushes you. Surprise, surprise, what happened at a place called Ixtui. As we marched into the same ravine that Montgomery marched into. Guess who was waiting for us on the high ground? There's the Cherokee. It reminded me of a place very early in the French and Indian War up north we called the Bloody Morning Scout, where Johnson led us into a ravine and all the Indians were waiting for us on the inside, and we got into a heck of a firefight. The same thing happened here. The Cherokee on the high ground, they opened fire on us. We deployed, and Marion coolly, smoothly gave his orders and commands. The men broke into sections, one covering each other, moving from tree to tree to tree, getting into a better firing position to try to drive the Cherokee off, who had the advantage. They must have ran out of ammunition because the fire started to slacken. At that point, we were directed to charge the top of the ridge. Being light infantry, this is what they do, because they can move quickly, move efficiently. So Marion, with Moultrie, the rest of us, we picked up, we drove up over the top, and we pushed the Cherokee away. Marion leading from the front. A good number of our men were wounded in this fight, but we achieved the victory needed to get the army through that same valley that the year before Montgomery had not been so successful. But once we were through and we started going to the Cherokee town, we watched what they did, how they sued for peace with the Cherokee by burning everything. All the villages, all the food, all the women and children, the elderly, all pushed up into the hills as the coming winter was not too far away. Marion saw this and he shook his head. And he even said to me, is this how you fight wars up north? We said, no. Because all that we've just done now is made this war go on longer. Because all we've done is made them even more angrier. We have not settled any peace by burning all their land and burning all their food. We just now made all that younger generation of the Cherokee angry at us. There will be no peace. And he watched this. And he realized that retribution does not work. We have to be able to make peace in order for peace to work. You can't put things to fire and sword and expect peace to work. So we returned to South Carolina, victorious in our campaign to once more punish the Cherokee for ever coming into South Carolina and causing the damage that they did. To only have them return a few years later, because they made really good friends with the British, who would use them against us at a later time. I think I'll save that for another story. I'll answer any questions if anybody has any. That was tough, just like Alan Lush. Yes, sir.
All right, so you're bigger and stronger. How do you think you would match up in a fight with Francis Marion?
I'd beat him. Physically, and this is the truth. I mean, as you look at history, one of the great things we can never prove is Marion ever drawing a sword. For a reason. Marion never got involved in a fight. Marion led the fight. Marion commits. So I know earlier we talked about the difference between Marion or Lee and Tarleton. Tarleton loved the fight, which got him in trouble. Waxhaws, he got shot from under his horse and was in command. Marion never lost command because he never got involved. He may pull out his pistol, he may say start the fight, then he commands. Fight, physical fight? Yeah, I'd probably beat him a little bit. Not to mention, I have the experience of close quarter combat that he doesn't. I can probably outshoot him.
But on that same level, I think those of us that have been in this service, some of the most deadly people we've ever known, at least me, were those short guys that were brawny and they could take it together. So I would never criticize.
Yeah, never assume. I used to have a guy in my SF detachment. He's about this tall. He's a Cambodian. Earned a Silver Star in Afghanistan. And it wasn't because of his charming personality. What other questions? Sir?
I asked you this yesterday, you told me the answer, but I don't think anybody else heard it. What years does this encompass?
This is basically covering 1761. So this is right at the, what we call the end of the Anglo-Cherokee War in South Carolina. The period in between here and, of course, what's coming up next, what we call the Regulator War. So there's this, the great absence of any control in the upcountry. So you'll see some of the local militia bands who will try to stop any of the lawless and banditry. And then, of course, we're leading up towards the American Revolution, which will come a few more years down the road from here. But this is the end of the Anglo-Cherokee War, or what we call the French and Indian War.
What type of firearm were you carrying?
This is a North Carolina long rifle. cow. 44. Effective range of over 300 yards, because that's what I hit targets with. And the Rangers did carry rifles, and they had rifles back then too. They just weren't as many of them. Not to throw a shameless plug out, but in about a couple weeks, November 9 through the 10th, is our big event up in Kershaw County in Camden. It is our annual Battle of Camden weekend, except this year, what we're doing on Saturday, we're actually doing 2 battles. One is Gibbs Plantation in the morning, and then we are doing Battle of the Waxhaws Saturday afternoon, and then Sunday we are actually doing the traditional Battle of Camden. Right now we're looking at anywhere between 600 to 700 reenactors. We have about 20 to 25 different settlers. We have demonstrators. We actually have folks coming down from Massachusetts, New York, typical Southern Department, which means Delaware, the Carolinas, as well as our good old folks from our unit here in the 2nd South. We're going to have folks coming up from Georgia and everything else. We are going to be doing, we're going to have some country dancers this year. We are doing our Guy Fawkes as we normally do. We do render honors, so one of the big traditions we do here at our event is anyone that we've lost in the hobby gets recognized. So as we're doing the Guy Fawkes bonfire, normally we'll call off their names, and then I shoot boots with a very large charge. And in fact, this year, one of said members will be honored that way, as we'll be shooting his ashes out of boots as part of the tradition. And we're also doing a school day on Friday. So right now we have about 2,000 to 2,100 students signed up, where they're going to come to the field, and basically it's an open round robin. They go anywhere they want, and we have certain stations set up, and anything you want to know about the American Revolution, but I was afraid to ask. And I'm running the artillery regiment. I'm probably going to have a couple 3-pounders, boots, a 6-pounder, a howitzer, a couple other guns. We let the kids play with it. We fire some demonstrations. We're also going to have enlistment. We're going to have folks playing with muskets. We're going to have soldiers' life, militia life, rifleman's life, distaff, MOUSE. I mean, all these different things going on, plus the demonstrators, all things. So we recommend, if you all want to see what a real battle looks like, the battlefield is actually in the woods. Because what we're trying to do is educate people on reality.
Could you repeat when and where?
This is November. It's in your little booklet on the back. There's an actual announcement. It's the 2nd weekend in November. It's 9 and 10th, the actual Saturday, Sunday. It's in a place called 1208 Keys Lane.
Oh yeah, the Battle of Camden.
Yeah, don't go to historic Camden. The reason being is we can't fit on historic Camden. There's too many of us. That's why we go to this private farm that has 550 acres. And we use it. The camp is huge. Anything else I can do for the greater group?
Hip hip huzzah! Hip hip huzzah! Hip hip huzzah!
Safe journeys. We'll see you next year.
Thank you, Eric, and thank everybody for coming. Lease up your area. If you can stay for a little while and help us pack some of this stuff. If you would like, you may have the little flags that's on your table as part of the decoration. But don't go, you can have a little bit of the cotton, but don't go away with all the cotton. Gus and Jim picked a little cotton wash yesterday, or the day before, and we have a little bit, so you can have a little bit if you need a sample at your house, and you can have the flags. The rest of it, we pack in the boxes, and the boxes are in this room. Hope to see you at another event next year for sure. Take care. Thank you. Starting, I mean everything.
find that girl you got tied up with a while ago?
Museum.
I don't know. Is she? Berkeley County? Georgetown. Complaining's all about getting people. No, the other